Yeah. So, do you remember the Ukraine war? I'm not sure a lot of people do. If you do remember it, there's some cheap merchandise available for it at the moment. Everything's sort of going cheap on this one. Not a lot of people still remember this one, but apparently it was a thing.
I was there.
Yes, up until relatively recently, we're told this was a thing.
I remember the black and white movies about it.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it's I mean, it wasn't always a thing. I mean, there was another thing before that, which was COVID. Now, I definitely remember that one because that one was 24/7 total narrative all the time. Every politician, every journalist, every Twitter pundit, every university admissions department, and every supermarket manager with a bloody budget for floor stickers and plexiglass. It was an all-encompassing narrative until relatively recently, and if you remember, they kind of walked us right up to the brink on that one because people were getting fired. Loads of people lost their jobs. They threatened to sack something like 10% of the NHS in the name of this thing. They fired all the care home workers. Some places went even further. Greece and Austria basically made it illegal, started fining people. Austria walked up to the day before they had to go out and start arresting millions of people and putting them in camps because of their refusal to get on board with the COVID narrative and to have the thing that they were required to have. They walked right up to the line on that one. Articles like this, the
local freedom lover.
Yeah, the total and complete vitriol that was poured out on this one. And then if you remember, just one day we woke up and it was just gone. The narrative had just disappeared. And basically...
yeah, but why did that happen exactly?
Well, I would say it's probably because there was starting to be some serious pushback.
Imperium Press is the classics department of the future. The Western canon has been under assault for generations. Everywhere you turn, the greatest thinkers of all time are being cancelled, and the new editions of their work spend more time apologizing for them than elucidating them. Since 2018, Imperium Press has been reclaiming the canon from forces that want to erase it. Offering a wide library, Imperium Press places the greatest thinkers of all time where they belong, outside of the liberal worldview. Homer, Sophocles, Shakespeare, and Beowulf stand shoulder to shoulder with political geniuses like Filmer and Maestra, as well as cutting-edge contemporary poetry, political theory, and fiction. Imperium Press is blazing a forward-looking trail to where the towering genius of mankind is again at the center of our cultural life. Browse our catalogue at imperiumpress.org and discover the classics department of the future.
And they walked us up to the line where they would have had to have really taken the gloves off.
Maybe elsewhere, but in the UK, the moment it died, overnight, it was visual. You could see people not bothering anymore. Was when the news came out that Boris Johnson was partying. When you found out the elites didn't care.
Yeah.
Suddenly it was like, oh, we don't have to
I think that's a factor, but it kind of disappeared across the world at the same time.
It really didn't. Like, I remember us doing podcasts about what happened in the UK, that no one was wearing masks anymore, none of the rules applied. And we had loads of friends and comrades in Germany and whatnot being like, you lucky bastards. Right. So all their media were constantly being like, well, the British, they're not doing this anymore. Why are we?
But I mean, places like that, Germany, and in particular Austria, I mean, they got to the point where they really would have had to have started the mass arrest in the concentration camps if they wanted to carry on that level of momentum that they did have.
Maybe.
So it kind of coasted for a while, but I mean, essentially, you sort of just dropped away.
Maybe Australia.
It reminded me very much of this book, George Orwell's 1984. In that, the party maintains a state of perpetual war, and the war serves as this control, as a focus for people's sort of emotions, and it keeps them in a constant state of anxiety, and it prevents them from questioning the party's authority. Now, in this case, I'm not talking about a literal party. I'm talking more of a uniparty, a sort of globalist structure. The entire cabal that we have running things at the moment. It was much more of that. And the other thing that you get from 1984 is that the party frequently changed the identity of the enemy, and it used its propaganda to convince people that the new enemy has always been the enemy, and it was always total. There was a manipulation of any sort of inconvenient facts in history was sort of airbrushed away, and again that sort of stopped people from questioning the long-term legitimacy of the existing structure that they had. So, to misquote 1984, we were never at war with plastic straws. We were always at war with COVID. And then it's, we were never at war with COVID. We were always at war with Russia. Things moved on. So anyway, getting us to that point with COVID, we then got another 18 months news cycle of Ukraine. And I think it is worth coming back to, because with both of these narratives, they were just so intense. So full spectrum narrative that entire time. There was no escaping it at any point. It was just being screamed at you constantly. And in both cases, it's just gone. Just gone. If you go to the BBC News page today, there is no mention of Ukraine. They've got a section behind the cost of living section that you can navigate into, but there's nothing on the front page about it. And COVID, of course, has completely disappeared. It's just all gone. So again, this regime shift that was all encompassing, every politician, every journalist, every Twitter pundit, every neocon warhawk, and every middle class garden with a flagpole was all over this thing, and then just gone. Anyway, so the new thing that has gone, and I've decided to call it. Yes, that's a sort of relevant meme to the events. But yeah, so I've basically decided to call it Russia has won. The collective West has lost another war, and I just want to I'm not going to show all of my workings for this, but I've called it, so therefore it is official. But I will show you a couple of points that sort of demonstrate quite neatly why this is gone, why Russia has won. It is just a question of playing it out at this point. Can we click into the video, John, and we'll see what this chap from the US has to say.
But you don't want to be trying to bake in long-term support when you're at the end of the rope. And in Ukraine, on the Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope. Today we announced $200 million, and we'll keep that aid going as long as we can. But it's not going to be indefinite. So, are we moving with a sense of alacrity? Absolutely. I couldn't give you a date.
So, as you can see, guys, the money's been turned off. So what you just watched there was the narrative morph from as long as it takes to as long as we can.
I think Ukraine really, for me, was used to turn everyone's eyes away from the mess up that was COVID.
Yeah.
So governments didn't want to answer any of their mistakes or go into the detail of what they did over those 2 years. So it was like, we need something shiny for the people to look at. Look at the old-fashioned enemy we called Russia, that we've been on off war for like 200 years, if not longer. Russia.
And there was dozens of conflicts live at the time, but this one got intense focus.
Yeah.
Well, it is closer to home. Like, it's actually in Europe instead of some country that no one cares about. To be fair, very few people care about Ukraine anyway.
It's relatively close to home.
But your point's entirely right, because, in a person, Boris Johnson, a man who completely messed up COVID, was then shown to not have cared at any point, but still put us under lockdown. And then immediately everyone remembers he became Ukraine's best friend, and all of his campaigning to us was, well, I support Ukraine. And the British public were like, well, maybe you could support us. That would be a better campaign. But that wasn't his strategy. Instead, as you rightly say, it was a way of trying to cover up his failures.
It was a distraction strategy, and it worked.
Yeah, it worked incredibly well. And then the focus became all about all this money that was sort of sent over there. Now, I don't believe for a moment that all of that money that has been said to go out there actually went out there. What I can imagine is that a lot of old military equipment has been given a book value, and that's been shipped out there. Now, there's one thing that I was talking to a forensic accountant years ago, because there was a business I was involved in which I had some concerns over, and they said, well, if you want to lose money in a system, by far the best way to do it is to have two companies in the same structure and basically shift products and services between the two of them. You could lose a lot in the gaps that way. That's almost certainly what's been happening here with this money flow that's been going out there. How much of real value actually went out to Ukraine, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if an awful lot of it ended up in sort of black book war chests.
Well, some of it ended up in Gaza.
Well, yes.
Well, we have witness accounts. I've been over it before. There's a guy called Lindy Beige, very cool YouTube channel. And he did an interview with a British volunteer, who went to go fight for the Ukrainians. And he goes through his whole period of training and then going to fight for ages and then coming back because he wants some time off. And one of the really interesting parts is when the first time they were actually deployed, they're in this convoy. And in the convoy, there's two trucks that are filled to the brim with rifles, ammo, blah, 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 blah. And when they get to the location where they're going to be deployed, one of the trucks has made it, the other one's just disappeared.
Yeah.
Never found again. full of American weapons and American ammo and so forth. But that's just gone now.
I can well believe it.
So now the unit just doesn't have that truck.
Yeah, I mean, at its root, I think it was a massive sort of money laundering exercise. But I mean, actually, it's the money that convinces me that, there's no question now Russia was won, because Russia always had the advantage in terms of sort of population, military size, production capability, all that kind of stuff. The only leveling factor was Western money that was being put into it. And I know we've got big questions about how much of that actually went there and how much was siphoned away, but that was the only factor that on paper gives Ukraine any advantage. And we just had the guy there explaining basically that money is being turned off. I've got another, I haven't got a clip for you, but I'm going to read you a bit from an interview with NV Business Outlet. And this is a guy called Gavin Gray, who was he's a bigwig at the IMF. The quote from him is, "Everyone understands that over time the international support for Ukraine will decrease." Well, actually, that's not what we were led to believe until recently. We were told as long as it takes. He goes on to say, so the country needs to develop internal resources for self-financing. The authority should focus on strengthening the capacity to collect revenues, both taxes and customs. So basically put up taxes. On what are they going to put up taxes on? There's no functional economy there. I'm going to give you another example. This is, now, I want to be clear with this. When you listen to this, right, do not think that you are listening to two individuals having a discussion. What you are listening to is two individuals playing out a script in order to give you a message. So listen to this and understand that they are sending you a message. And what is that message? Let's play this, John.
The latest situation. The counteroffensive is going as planned. Is it going as planned? Well, as much as we can have it going as planned with the amount of weapons and the quality of the ammunition that we're getting. The steadier the deliveries and the bigger the deliveries of the armaments for Ukraine, the faster the counteroffensive can go.
That's the problem is you've regained, less than 1% of the ground that you lost before the invasion?
Unfortunately, that is the case.
And you only have another month to go before?
Another month or so before the cold and the winter settles in, before we will have to actually pause until the springtime. And this is the sad news for us. And I think not just for us, but all the countries that are supporting Ukraine right now.
Is that continuing? Because I get the impression, I'm certainly told, that there is, you're having to try harder and harder to get aid specifically from Europe and other Western countries.
It is getting harder and harder because Russia is winning the battle of a protracted conflict today.
So they are winning?
In terms of protracted conflict strategies that they're trying to impose on Ukraine and the world, unfortunately, we have to say that they are gaining the upper hand yet again.
So, I mean, that is basically softening people up on all of this stuff. The narrative changed, I think, several weeks ago. Don't know if you guys picked up on when the narrative on this really started to change, but it was that there was a lot of emphasis placed on that counteroffensive. Didn't really go anywhere, and you could hear the messaging in the regime machine, in the news machine change, and it's basically a way of indicating to all of the sort of lackeys in the system, you need to start stepping away from this. You need to start disassociating yourself. You need to find a new focus. You need to find something else to put your time and effort in. But that is that subtle sort of regime messaging. You noticing that?
Yeah, I think that this probably doesn't signal the end of sending money to the Ukrainian state en masse from the United States either, because, I mean, there are arguments for it either way. But take, for example, Afghanistan, where there was no argument. This was just a huge waste of time and everyone knew it. I mean, in 2010 or something, the British publicly said, yeah, we're done with this. And the Americans stuck around for another 9 years for some stupid reason. I don't want to underestimate the idea of the money pit that the United States system can seem to function on.
Oh, I'm sure
and that's with Afghanistan, where there basically is no argument. With Ukraine, at least there's an argument like, oh, we're weakening Russia, and that's our geopolitical rival. So I really don't think they're actually going to stop.
Yeah, I'm sure there's an advantage for money laundering reasons to be able to maintain a trickle, but
it's just the public perception.
Yeah, but they're not,
forget about
they're not getting the big appropriations through the Senate anytime soon.
Well, one of the things I found most interesting about the narrative shift you mentioned is Poland. When the Poles turned around and said, yeah, Ukraine is like a drowning man, and we don't want to save him because he'll drown us too as we save him. I think that was the Prime Minister. Words to that effect. I was like, okay, that's interesting from the Poles. So there is definitely a shift. But I don't think
Yeah,
it'll
I
stop
mean,
them either.
I've been hearing this from a while from them. They've basically been signaling to all their people, get off of this and go on to something else. And I want to be careful how I phrase this because I don't want to appear in any way insensitive. But the events in Israel over the last few days were basically, I think, a bit of a gift to the regime because they wanted something to distract from this because they knew that they'd lost the funding argument. That wasn't getting through, the Senate anymore. The population wasn't really there for it. I mean, I can go for a drive in the countryside now and not see a Ukraine flag sticking out of a upper middle class garden. Whereas those were everywhere sort of a year ago. There has been that shift. And again, sort of coming back to my sort of point about 1984, there is always a perpetual war. Sometimes it was a war on a virus, and sometimes it's a war on a different country, and sometimes it's a war on a terrorist state. But there was always a perpetual war, and it's always blasted out in these sort of intense, ultra narrative terms to keep everybody in a perpetual state of anxiety on this stuff. So and of course the narrative changes, and then of course you got those two Kay and that Ukrainian MEP and saying that Russia is basically winning the kinetic war. Well, yeah, but that is the war. The West has been busy maintaining the narrative war for the last 18 months, but narrative wars don't actually win battles.
They don't, but I think it was pretty obvious pretty soon when this started that Russia was no threat to the West. When we were told Russia was going to invade, it was quite a common feeling that Russia used to be a world power, has nuclear weapons, they could sweep through Europe like the Nazis did.
Yes.
And they've had several years now. They can't even beat Ukraine, and Ukraine has hardly any armaments. I know they've been supplied now. So Russia proved to the world that they're not a threat to anybody, really, apart from one or two of their neighbours. And it should have ended there. That's when we should have sought some sort of peace agreement.
Well, there was a peace deal on the table in, what was it, March of 2022, and Boris Johnson flew out there and scuppered it. And they do this thing. I mean, that's the other thing that I noticed. They do this thing where a whole bunch of senior figures from the coalition, European, a Brit, and an American, will fly out there and deliver the same message. So Boris Johnson flew out there, and I think it was March or April of 2022, and he kiboshed this peace deal that they had basically ready to go with the Russians. And you also got some senior US and EU people go out there, and we've just had the same thing a few weeks back as well, where basically the money people flew out and said, okay, we're turning off your money taps. And that's when you started seeing these sort of statements coming out from the IMF and from the Americans and so on, saying, that money tap is being turned off. I mean, to your point, I can imagine there's going to be a long trickle of cash because it's useful for money laundering purposes, but it's going to be nothing of the scale that is going to overcome the fact that, you've got a significantly larger country with a significantly larger military against a significantly smaller country. And I mean, to your point, Ukraine has done well grinding it out, but at the cost of horrific numbers of casualties. And then that's, I mean, I think the average age of Ukrainian soldiers is now over 40. I mean, remarkable. So the people in the high command are getting younger, and the people on the front line are getting older, which is a worrying sign. And I just think it was always going to be this way with this lot. I mean, the guy in charge was never a serious character, and I'm going to point up something which got dismissed when we pointed this out in the early stages of this. But this is President Zelensky playing the piano with his penis. So let's just watch this. Yeah, I mean,
to be fair to him, he was a comedian.
Yeah,
and just because you're a comedian doesn't mean then you can't move into another profession to be taken seriously. So I get your point.
I don't think this man is a statesman.
He may not be,
but who is in Ukraine?
Yeah.
I mean, like the previous governments we were speaking before we started were all complete corrupt individuals who also couldn't be taken seriously. So,
and I think you'll find that's throughout the whole history of the human race. Most leaders are like that. And then going back to your book, what I think is our problem, it's human nature. So it's like a symbiotic relationship between the citizen and their leaders. So citizens go, we're going to make you leader, but you've got to keep us safe. So leaders go, we're going to keep you safe against a saber-toothed tiger. So we're going to build a wall. Right, we've done that now. Well, how are you keeping us safe now? Because we're already safe from the tiger. I need to create another enemy now to keep them safe from. And it's that symbiotic relationship going backwards and forwards that leads us to this sort of politics.
Well, I mean, he quite obviously didn't keep his people safe, but I mean, I take your point. The Western powers are able to present another bogeyman after the virus is going to get you, unless you do everything that we say and you give up your freedoms and you send us more tax money and we keep you safe from the virus. Then it was, oh, now you need to give up your freedoms and give us more tax money. We keep you safe from the evil Putler.
Yeah, and then and now it's Islamic extremists again.
Yeah.
Which is always a nice one to have in your back pocket to pull out whenever you need it. And
no doubt we're now going to get a string of terrorist attacks in the West, plenty going on in the Middle East, and then that will run for 18 months and there'll be another news cycle.
Yep.
There'll be another current thing. So, I mean, I just wanted to do this because I know no one's talking about Ukraine anymore, but I just wanted to point out that, bear in mind, in recent memory, the narrative has just changed on a dime several times. You got to watch out for this, not get wrapped up in the current narrative, step back and see what the people in charge are actually benefiting from any of this stuff.
And it's basically, look at the shiny thing, don't look over here, look at the shiny thing, look at the shiny thing. That's it. Look at the shiny thing.
Yeah, exactly. Quite right.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium book clubs, this one being Rakib Ehsan's Beyond Grievance. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.